So welcome everyone at this event. This is the closing conferences of our project, which ran for 13 months and focused on accessibility. Accessibility is not only a physical feature of the built environment, but is also the accessibility of services. This was our understanding. And we also ran an inclusive project. So we were not only interested in the built environment and how it can be made accessible for people who are using wheelchairs, but also for other disability groups. So we followed a universal design approach. We represent 3 different countries in this project: Hungary, Slovakia, and Czechia. And here with us, we have a number of experts from all 3 countries, including people who are experts on universal design, architects, engineers, but we also have legal experts who help us understand and navigate the policy environment and develop better policies. In the audience, we have currently a bit over 60 people. We were expecting a bit more, just under 100, and we had altogether, I think, a fairly even distribution between the 3 countries. That is roughly 30 people from Hungary and the same amount from Slovakia and Czechia. So truly, this is an international audience. In the agenda, you see that the president of MEOSZ, Ms. Ágnes Kovács, was supposed to deliver a welcoming speech. Unfortunately, our president, Ágnes Kovács, cannot be with us today. They are busy opening new social services in one town in rural Hungary, and she needed to attend this service due to an emergency situation. But I'm happy to convey her message that she sent us with her apologies. She said that she's deeply thankful to partner organizations, SOCIA Foundation and NRZP, for being with us throughout these 30 months. And she hopes that by joining all these expert teams from 3 countries and by delivering all the reports that we are going to present to you today, we will be able to achieve some change, policy change in the country level, so in Hungary, in Slovakia and Czechia, but also in the EU level. That's her message. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Pál Szekeres, who is with us. Maybe he will be too humble to tell you that he's one of the very, very few people in the world who have Olympic medals, both Olympic medals and Paralympic medals from sports events. That's your background, isn't it, Pál? The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the accessibility and disability. As Peter told me about sport, I had a sport accident in 1991. From that time, I'm a wheelchair user, so I know very well which challenges we have as disabled persons with architectural, informational and communicational barriers we can have during our life. In 1991 in Hungary, and also I think it was the same situation in Slovakia and Czech Republic, and I'm very happy to stay together with you, even in just in a virtual way, with our Czechs and Slovakian friends and Hungarian friends all together to work for a very important topic. So in 1991, when I want to do something, I need permanently help, and that was a really challenge, like to go to the Camel Trophy or to other very, very challenging competitions. So one story, in 1991, we went to the theater with my friends, but in the theater there was no toilet, and our plan was, after the theater, go to the restaurant. So between the restaurant and theater, they just walk 500 meters. I had to take my car. I went home to the toilet, and then I arrived to the restaurant late. So they have the appetizers and the soup, and I arrived just for the main dish. and I was able to drink only one small glass of beer because the restaurant was not accessible too. So it was the start, I think, in everywhere, and we have still problems. And if you look out from your countries, this problem is not a V4 problem. This problem is not an EU problem, it's a global problem. Everywhere there are challenges, everywhere there are problems, and we can be proud of our results, because our countries is much more accessible than 10 years ago or 20 years ago and even 30 years ago. But there are always new challenges, and for that I think the best way to support each other and also to be a friend, but a critical friend for the government, for the local authorities. And what I can tell you from my personal experience, because I'm working for the government, we need more and more disabled people in any level of the public administration. We need much more decision maker from the disabled persons, because with that we can do two things. One is there are no decision, there are no things without us. So there is what is on our flag now is nothing about us without us. But I recommend you to make a step forward to say nothing without us, because we don't know in which situation and which point there will be issues about disability. And of course, the entry level is the accessibility, because if we don't have accessibility, we can be there. And we need the accessibility not only for the physical world, but also for the wheelchair world. So I hope if there are any deaf people, there will be, we have sign language interpreters. And I really recommend for our speakers to give full informations for our blind friends, because these things are very, very basic needs to have an accessible word, to have an accessible communication. So the heritage of communism is already behind us. We can use many services, facilities, but there are still problems. And one of the key words, Peter already told, is the universal design or design for all. But for that, we have to teach and help for each other, because if you travel, if you go in other cities, you can see many good examples, and also you can see problems. So for that case, I'm really happy when the V4 and also the EU support with founding money some conferences and events, because I think the events is the biggest chance to talk about more, to involve more people. As is not only conferences, I really recommend to you to organize some cultural and sport events, because in that times and in that events, there are our flag bearers, there are our people who have a possibility to talk in the media, to talk with the leaders. And what I can recommend you is to help for everybody to have better accessibility. So first, we need the accessibility here inside. And I'm pretty sure who are here with us, we have accessibility in that level, and we have to really support the people to have the mental accessibility, to understand our problems, because it's the problem of the community, it's a problem of the society. And I hope all the countries and all the people who have not that problems think about to giving us a net, not a fish, like from the Bible. And the entry level is the accessibility. So don't forget, nothing about us without us. And I wish you a good conference and I hope it will have a very, very, very strong outcomes for the society. Thank you.
Thank you for these lovely thoughts, Pál. I think we are ready to roll on. The next presentation is by myself because I acted as project coordinator through this project. I will share my screen. I hope everyone can see my screen now. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Good. So, since the previous speaker reminded us to explain, to make accessible everything, including our presentations, I'm telling to those who cannot see the screen that in the screen there is the title of my presentation, that is what did we do in this project and why, and there's also an image that's an illustration done by an illustrator for our media campaign that shows the entrance of a school building that is a quite old school building with steps leading up to the entrance of the building, and at the bottom of the steps there is a wheelchair user who can't go up the steps even though some children are running in the building using the steps. This is to represent lack of accessibility in public schools that is very, very relevant even today in Hungary, and I believe in Slovakia and Czech Republic as well. In this presentation I will speak about the project itself. But allow me just very briefly to give some historical background because we are not, even though we are speaking in the present about present problems, but these present problems are caused by historical elements, history that is behind us, including in the last century, before the democratic changes in these three countries, because Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary all belong to the post-socialist region. And this is very important even when we talk about accessibility. Why? Not only because of the built environment, not because those buildings were built under communism. If you go anywhere in Europe, you see buildings that were built in the 70s or in the 60s that are inaccessible, including in Paris or in Brussels or in Germany. That's not specific to this region, but what is specific to this region is many other factors that influence how we can protect human rights, for instance. We have certain social services that are specific to this region, and we have political systems that are a bit specific to this region. And this influences how disability rights organizations can push for changes. Indeed, in the post-socialist region, I think many researchers mentioned and showed us that disability rights organizations tend to be a bit weaker than in some other countries due to the historical heritage of state socialism. The second issue that is important in this context is that our struggle for accessible environment didn't start today. It started way back. Even in the 70s, there are documents that show that in all these three countries, so in Hungary, but also in Czech Republic, there were disability, or Czechoslovakia back then, there were disability organizations that were telling those governments, those communist governments, to change things for the better, to take into account disability rights. So it didn't start today, and it didn't start yesterday. It started 50 years ago. This is why it's so upsetting in a way that we still need to fight for these changes, and that there are still so many lack-ofs. The third thing is that, as Pál mentioned in his opening speech, there's been progress. There's been great progress. Of course, if you walk the streets of any of the cities of these three countries, you will see many accessible buildings today. This is one part of the story. Look at the progress we have had. But the other part of the story is that people are very right to be upset and angry about the lack of changes. So I believe it's both stories, both a story of progress and the story of stagnation and remaining and very persistent barriers. And I wanted to show you a few photos. I know we are at a project conference, so we should be discussing all the project things, but we live, in the real world, and the real world is not projects. I wanted to show you a few pictures of people in the past. In the first picture, you see a young man sitting in a wheelchair, quite old-fashioned wheelchair, probably handmade back in the 60s. This was taken in Budapest in 67, I believe, and it's a black and white photo. And I love this photo. First of all, it's beautiful. I think the whole layout and the structure of the photo, but secondly, it's also a lovely photo because it reminds us how the built environment and how the physical world around us influences how we think. This wheelchair is good for to be used in streets, but it would be very difficult. And you can tell when you look at the wheelchair that it is designed for the user to use it by himself. But you couldn't really use it in so many buildings today because of its size, because of its structure. This is the past, but there are also a political past in these three countries. There are past events in these three countries, and I brought you two photos. In the first photo, it's a clipping from a newspaper, a black and white one on the left-hand side. That is a demonstration organized by disabled people, I believe, in 1991, so after the democratic changes in Budapest, in front of the social ministry. Back then it was called the Ministry of Welfare. They were demonstrating because they thought that their rights were breached. So yes, it didn't start yesterday, it started way back. On the right-hand side, you see a colored photo that was taken, I think, in '89, again in Budapest, at a massive public demonstration for democratic changes. This was not a disability-specific demonstration, but the picture shows four wheelchair users among many other pedestrians being present at this event. And this photo reminds us that disability rights are not separate from wider civil rights. It is always, disability rights is always part of civil rights and democratic systems. Demanding an accessible environment is not something very specific to disabled people. This should be an integral part of how our society is constructed. It is civil rights. The next slide shows three photos. On the upper left-hand side, you see a courtroom with a judge and with a lawyer and with a wheelchair user man who is the plaintiff in a case. That man, like Bendegúz, Hungarian participants, I think you know him well. He's an architect, a trained architect, an accessibility universal design expert. He's not with us today. He's also vice president of MEOSZ, our organization. And in 2002, he brought a case to the court in Budapest against a restaurant, a coffee house restaurant, that had been renovated back then, but it was still inaccessible. He wanted to use this restaurant, and he was treated in an inhumane way. And basically, it was a litigation case to push for changes in policies. It was a quite famous case back in the time. And the picture shows Bendegúz, the wheelchair user man, sitting in the courtroom at one of the meetings of the court. The other two photos are pictures of public demonstration in the Budapest metro. Quite recently, I think 6 or 7 years ago, when there were big debates about the renovation of one of the major metro lines in Budapest, that is the longest metro line as well. The city council wanted to renovate it without making all metro stops and metro stations accessible. There was a public uproar, and you see in the photos, in those two photos, on the left-hand side, you see one of the activists speaking in a microphone with banners that we need lifts in this metro station. And on the right-hand side, you see a wheelchair user woman trying to use the elevators, the stairs. Of course, she couldn't, but this was to show the contrast, how people who walk can use it, and when people use wheelchairs, they can't. And the last photo, the last slide, is two photos from abroad. On the left-hand side, you see two wheelchair user activists chained to a bus. This is in London, sometime in the 1990s. They again demanded the very same as before, accessible public transport, because public transport runs on public money and the public includes disabled people, so they have the right to use those public transport vehicles. And on the right-hand side, it's a black and white photo. You see a somewhat older photo. I think this is the 70s. One of the banners, 4 activists in the photo are in the photo, wheelchair user activists. One of the banners reads, "Lifts, not lies." The other banner says, "Buses are for everyone." So these photos are really something from the history, right? This 3 decades or 4 decades of struggles for change. So you may want to ask, you know, why showing us these photos now in 2023? Because what we were trying to do in this project was pretty much this, except we didn't chain ourselves to buses. We did activities to tell people that accessibility is a basic human right, to be able to use a public hospital, to be able to use a public school, to be able to use the metro line. These are all basic human rights that all people have. And it is very telling that we still need to tell this message to the public. Now, I compiled a slide with some issues that were relevant in the past and some issues that are relevant today. This is not an exhaustive list. Many things are missing, of course. For example, cultural or political factors. But here they are. Some of the changes that we have gone through in the last 30 or 40 years, because there's no doubt there is progress in accessibility. So on the left-hand side, you see issues in the past. These include little awareness about disability rights that was very present up till the late 90s, I think, across Europe. Believe or not, the Hungarian Disability Rights Act of 1998, one study showed it was the second of such disability-specific anti-discrimination laws in the continent. The first was a British one. So there used to be really weak legal tools for disability rights. Today, we have many disability rights laws. We have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We have all sorts of national laws, including in Slovakia and in Czech Republic, also in Hungary. So that's a much stronger legal basis today in human rights. Then we also had, back in the past, laws on the built environment that had, again, very weak measures or provisions for accessibility. I think an architect in the 70s couldn't really look at the building law of the time, looking for accessibility requirements as they can today. Today, we have standards and building laws in all 3 countries. Our policy analysis showed that should help architects and engineers when they are designing the built environment that is built today. These laws should also have measures that would actually make it mandatory for them to use these standards. It is not to be chosen, it's not optional. Some of these are mandatory for them to use, yet they don't use it. Back in the past, that is in the 3rd row, countries work on their own to solve social problems. So that was just before the spark of globalization. Hungarian problems were only for up to Hungarians. Czechoslovakia worked on its own, or maybe in the socialist bloc, but it wasn't as much connected as it is today. Today, we have many relevant international and EU level provisions that influence how we think about these issues. We have EU laws, and we have, very importantly, EU funds, massive amount of EU funds that are used for the built environment in all 3 countries. So when you see a hospital building, or when you see a school, or when you see a cultural center or a museum that is inaccessible, and it was renovated by using EU funds, it is not only the government's responsibility that the funds were used in that way, it is also the European Union's responsibility. So we, as advocates, need to work with institutions of the European Union as well. There used to be very few good practices. Today, there are many good practices that can be looked at. We published reports on that in all 3 languages. If you don't see the reports from your own country, Slovak and Czech participants are encouraged to go to SOCIA Foundation and NRZP and ask for those reports, because they contain many good practices and also some not so good practices that are present in your countries. There used to be weaker tools to hold governments and public bodies accountable for what they have done. Today, we have many more opportunities to launch public complaints if we want to, and we did so in our project. We did launch several complaints procedures. And lastly, in the bottom row, I think there was this notion about accessibility that is something to do with people with a physical disability. I think that was the public understanding of accessibility even 20 or 30 years ago. Maybe even today, some people believe so. Well, the fact is that today we like to talk about universal design, that is a concept for all, that is inclusive to all disability groups, and not only disability groups, but all members of society. But there are plenty of materials to read about universal design online if you're interested. So, why we did this project? Because we wanted to convey a message from this project. And this message is that despite progress in accessibility, there is systemic and serious violation of accessibility principles in Czechia, Hungary, and Slovakia. This is very important that it's systemic. These are the cases when new buildings are built or old buildings are renovated and the result is still inaccessible. These are not exceptions, unfortunately. Yes, there's been progress, but they're systematically still built, these inaccessible buildings. And what is also important, and that these are serious violations of human rights. We have anti-discrimination laws that show us that it's just not allowed to discriminate against people. It's not allowed to build inaccessible buildings. This is discrimination. And importantly, this is to do with money. There is systemic misuse of public funds in all three countries. This is a legal matter, and I think it's up to the three organizations and many more disability rights organizations to build on that and to launch complaints, to launch legal cases if needed, because public funds shouldn't build more barriers. And just a thought, I'm aware of my time, I think I still have 3 minutes, just a thought that may sound a bit academic or philosophical. How do we know what we know about accessibility? And there's also an image on this slide, accessible city, it says, that's the title of the image, with a question mark. And it shows a wheelchair user woman standing in the middle of a cityscape, and she's surrounded by many buildings, old and new. There's one building with a writing on it, museum. There's another bank building. There's a Hungarian flag and the European Union flag in front of one of the buildings. One of the buildings might be a hospital with a Red Cross. There's also a metro entrance, but it's full of stairs and no lifts. This image is supposed to send a message to all of us that we like to talk a lot about accessible city. And there's even an accessible city award in the European Union. But the fact is that many users, wheelchair users and other disabled people, still feel that our cities are very much inaccessible. There are so many barriers around. That's the everyday experience of people. Why is this relevant? Because the question, how do we know what we know, is actually more complex than it sounds. When you ask policymakers, they will tell you a different story. They say that, oh, come on, there's nothing wrong with accessibility. You know, it's all good. You know, we have the strong laws. We have non-discrimination law. We have the Disability Rights Act. We have the CRPD, that is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, issued by the United Nations. So what's your problem? We have right building laws, right? So the fact is that if you ask policymakers on the one hand, they think they know that everything is okay. Maybe there are some exceptional cases that are, you know, errors. But if you ask users of the built environment that are, you know, wheelchair users or people with a visual impairment or people with cognitive differences, autistic people, people with a learning disability, if you ask them, they will tell you a completely different story. So the question, how do we know what we know, directs us to an answer that is this. We should know what we know by listening to disabled people, because they know how they use the public environment. Many of you in the audience use a wheelchair or other kind of special aids, but I myself, I'm presenting to you, I don't have a disability. I walk and I see according to the, between quotation marks, according to the norm. So to me, all this knowledge about the massive problem about inaccessibility, even in new buildings, I do not know it because of myself, because I feel it, because it's in my body, because I struggle to get into a bakery to get a piece of bread, or that I need to go to the 5th restaurant to see whether they have an accessible entrance, or that I cannot use the post office near my flat because it's inaccessible to wheelchair users. I know what I know from disabled people, from my colleagues here at MEOSZ, and I know it from reports that we published. This is why we did this project, exactly, to create knowledge, to tell policymakers who think they know that they don't know. Policymakers are not aware in these 3 countries, they are not aware of the massive problems with inaccessible environments. This is why we did 3 main things in this project. First, we created knowledge. Second, we tried to empower users of buildings, activists. And lastly, we did advocacy actions. Under knowledge creation, we published, for example, policy analysis in all 3 countries. These are available in native languages. So you have a Slovak and you have a Czech and you have a Hungarian policy analysis available to you to read. These are analyses that look at both written laws and practice. And all 3 analyses show gaps. Yes, they're nice laws, but there's very mixed experiences about practice. And we also published good practices and lessons learned reports in 3 countries. These are also available in all 3 languages. Second, we empowered users. That was very important. We organized trainings for activists to use an accessibility monitoring toolkit. That toolkit was developed by us, by our expert team. One of the leader of the team will speak to you later. This accessibility toolkit allows people who are not trained in architecture at all to have a basic understanding of the requirements, and the toolkit, by using the toolkit, we are able to tell whether the building or a built environment is accessible for all or not, whether it's up to basic standards of universal design or not. And if we are using this toolkit, by the results of the toolkit, if, for example, I go to a nearby library and I evaluate this building it takes around an hour, maybe less, to tell that it's inaccessible, I can actually point at the problems of accessibility with this building. I can actually point at actual problems by using this toolkit. And once I use this toolkit, I will be able to launch a complaint procedure that is within the legal framework of the given country. Here in Hungary, we use this toolkit, and my colleague Melinda later will tell you about some of the experiences with this toolkit and activists who used it and then launched complaint procedures. And lastly, and this is the end of my presentation, we also had an aim with this project to, quoting the old remark, speak truth to power, to go to holders of power, governments, city council, public bodies, those who have the money, the big money, and tell them the truth. And this is, in another word, means advocacy. We need to advocate. And this is what we did. We organized national level campaigns in all 3 countries, in Hungary and in Slovakia and in Czechia. And we also did a joint event, an advocacy event in the European Parliament, because as I said, this is also a matter that is relevant to EU level decision makers. EU has an obligation to stand by its promise to human rights laws. It's part of the United Nations Convention, etc. So we brought this message to the European Parliament in December, and we presented our reports that include evidence that that accessibility principles are breached when they use EU funds in all 3 countries. And I thank you for your attention. If you have questions, you will have time to ask those questions at the very end of the event. And I will stop my presentation now. It's stopped. So I think we are ready to carry on. I went over time a bit, I'm sorry for that. With Dagmar Lanzová, who is our next speaker from Czechia. And I think all interpreters know what they should do to switch this, using the switchboard to switch to the right language channels. If you are from Slovakia, you are free to follow Dagmar in your own language. Stay here with us. If you're Hungarian, just remain in the Hungarian channel. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Dagmar, the floor is yours.
Děkuji za slovo.
Thank you very much for the floor, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and thank you very much for giving me a chance to participate in this fantastic project. I would now like to share the results and experience from this project in the Czech Republic. That is how we see it in the Czech Republic. What I would like to do now is try and share my presentation. Hope it works. I have the presentation open, but somehow I'm struggling to share it. My apologies for that.
There is a green button, share screen.
Yes, I know. I selected.
Apologies, I'm just looking for. Well, I'm looking for the presentation now in the first place.
All right.
And I'm struggling a bit.
Já jsem se domnívala, že pokud mám prezentaci otevřenou.
I had thought that if I have the presentation open in my computer, that it would be easy, but it does not seem to be the case. So please bear with me. So I need to take a different route, perhaps. And I do hope that now you can see my screen, that I can start sharing. Now, allow me to welcome you all and greet you from the seat of our National Disability Council, which is a partner of the Design for All project on behalf of the Czech Republic. I would like to mention that the NDC, the National Disability Council, advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities. So our aim is really to advocate for their rights, their interests, and pursuant to Article 9 of the CRDP, the accessibility issue is one of those that we also advocate for.
Please
and
let
I am in
me
charge
stop
of
you for a
accessibility.
moment. We not see in your presentation, so I will stop your screen sharing now, and you should reshare your screen, and please choose the screen one option after you click to the green button. Yes, we can see your presentation now. Thank you.
Yes, so now is it better? Is it better now?
Yes, it's better.
Omlouvám se.
My apologies once again.
Národní rada skutečně má
The National Disability Council has more than 20 years of experience with the issue of accessibility. We have come up with a whole range of analyses and suggestions. We have cooperated on also legislation in the Czech Republic, and well, at the same time we advocate for the rights and interests of users. We also join together some 100 groups, societies for persons with disabilities. We should, at this closing conference, pose several questions, simple questions, I would say. However, such questions do not have simple answers to them. Do we really know how to design buildings so that they are user-friendly and really friendly for all? Can our designers design such buildings, really? And can we indeed build such buildings? And last but not least, will these new constructions, new buildings or newly adapted buildings allow for independent and safe movement of all persons entering those buildings and using those buildings? I believe that the conclusions of this project, the outputs, have provided answers to many of such questions, even though these answers are not always pleasant ones. So perhaps not pleasant from the perspective of our politicians and local governments, but all the project outputs, I must say, I continue to use in order to advocate the rights of persons with disabilities, aimed at improving the accessibility of built environment in the Czech Republic. As has already been mentioned, in the project, we've worked on several outputs, be it the situation analysis, examples of good and bad practice. Then there have also been other outputs of the project, which have certainly contributed to interesting conclusions, be it the assessment forms or info leaflets, possibility of benchmarking methodologies, and various requirements posed by the respective countries, that is the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, regarding accessibility. Besides that, there have been very worthwhile workshops, the chance to share with users, the general public, local governments and policymakers. This is also something that I regularly do within my work in the National Disability Council. And as a result of that, measures can be proposed for persons with disabilities, and we can also check how the requirements can be incorporated in the designs of the projects and in the buildings. Then naturally, we also need to take a look at the public administration and policymakers who come up with legislation governing that area, whether it really incorporates those requirements. The situation analysis is a legal analysis of the situation in the Czech Republic. We've already touched upon the background documents. Then we've looked at the status quo, the current situation in the Czech Republic. And then in the Czech Republic, I should mention for a number of years, we've been going through recodification of the construction legislation. So it is a crucial time in terms of the direction that this legislation will take going forward. It really needs to be functional in terms of feasibility and also usability by the users. As for the current situation in the Czech Republic,
Dagmar, for interrupting you. We can't see the changes on your slide. We are still seeing only the first slide you have. That is the cover page.
Can you change slides on your open PowerPoint program? In your screen left side.
Oh, I'm really sorry about that, because actually I'm clicking on the slides and moving the slides.
Can we try to reshare again your screen? And now please choose screen share and choose a screen 2 option if you have screen 2. I will stop again and you should start again now. If you have a screen 2 option. Yes, we can see properly now. Thank you very much.
Now we are still seeing situační analýza. Now we are seeing situační analýza slide. Is this the right one?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yes, that's the correct slide. But now I have a problem. Oh no, it's okay. Now it's all set. Thank you. Thank you very much for letting me know that it doesn't work. Well, technology issues. Sorry. I hope it will be okay now. So let me go back to the current situation of accessibility in the Czech Republic. Barrier-free use of buildings is enshrined in legislation, that is the Construction Act. It is seen as a public interest that needs to be adhered to and fulfilled at all times. The Construction Act also includes implementing legal regulations. In the Czech Republic, there is decree number 398 from the year 2009, collection of laws on general technical requirements ensuring barrier-free use of buildings. This decree lays down detailed parameters for creating an accessible environment for persons with severe mobility issues, visual impairment, or hearing impairment, and also for other persons such as pregnant women, small children, the elderly, and other groups of citizens. Unfortunately, in the Czech Republic, we don't have any Czech technical standard dedicated to accessibility. Our standardization agencies have not allowed the National Disability Council to take part in the drafting of EN 17210 on accessibility and usability of the built environment. However, I believe that this EN technical standard is truly great, so that's why I'm mentioning it here, because it should be the starting point, the starting document for further documents, not only in the Czech Republic, but in the whole EU. What is an issue and a big pain in the Czech Republic is the fact that the barrier-free use, or accessibility, if you wish, is not advocated by anyone. It is mandatory, but there is no entity, no society, no expert, that is, no state-appointed expert, who would actually supervise the requirements set down in legislation, who would, for instance, point out that there is something wrong, something's not adhered to. Another issue is a lack of methodologies, methodological guidance, and as a result of that, we do not have any professional platform, state guaranteed professional platform for barrier-free use, and naturally it should also monitor the field because it develops dynamically. We also need to share methodologies, examples of good practice, but this is lacking. And we should indeed have this platform to strive to put this new development in accessibility into practice. The Czech Republic, as I've already outlined, is going through this recodification of the construction legislation. New Construction Act was adopted in 2021, but it was adopted before the new government was formed. And after the new government was then formed, the new government came up with a manifesto in which it has requested postponing the force and effect of the new Construction Act, and it has requested that the main shortcomings of this act be remedied. Naturally, each government has a different approach to how this issue and the construction processes in the Czech Republic should be set. So at this stage, we have the new Construction Act, and we know that in the Chamber of Deputies and the lower house of Parliament, an amendment to the Construction Act is being negotiated, and what rules will apply in the future is hard, if not impossible, to predict. Related to the recodification of construction legislation are the new construction requirements. Construction requirements include like 3 regulations: regulation for the use of the area, then general construction requirements, and requirements for barrier-free use of buildings. Besides that, there is an empowerment provision in the Construction Act which stipulates that the capital city of Prague can establish specific requirements for the use of the area and barrier-free use of buildings. However, then the requirements are valid for the whole Czech Republic and then apply to the whole of the country. pursuant to the new legislation, there should be just one such document governing all these areas, that is general construction requirements and all the other things. The empowerment provision, which makes it possible for Prague and also Brno to set different requirements, actually still exists, and this can pertain to accessibility. We think that this could be a problem if Prague, Brno and Ostrava actually as well can determine different requirements. It would be an issue, because a wheelchair user naturally has to have a toilet of a certain size, the door has to be of the same size, even in Prague and Brno or Ostrava, and the same should apply to small municipalities and to large cities like Prague, Brno or Ostrava. So there should be this a really single design for also we're really concerned that the requirements regarding accessibility may be fragmented, and that also applies to the visually impaired, etc. The fragmentation, for instance, is something that is in other countries. So for instance, in the German Bundesländer or in Switzerland, in the cantons, and in France as well. So there can be different requirements. So on, for instance, almost like one side of the street, you would have the light signals, and also sound signal for the visually impaired, but on the other side of the street there would be a completely different sound, and that's wrong, because it has to be as much unified as possible. So there have to be really single requirements, and ideally these standards should be unified across the whole EU. And perhaps I've moved the wrong button now. The new construction requirements are very detailed, so formally 3 pieces of regulations are now joined together. There are also requirements for traffic instruction, public health requirements, further requirements applicable to the sewage water main systems, etc. So we are really concerned whether this new piece of legislation will still be understandable, and we do hope that no vital information disappears out of it. So what should we do going forward? The National Disability Council is well aware of the fact that accessibility is a broad, multidisciplinary area that constantly develops. It's not just about a built environment, but also accessibility of the indoor space, provision of services such as, for instance, information, orientation, emergency systems. So all of those need to be taken on board as well. Therefore, we are well aware of the fact that now we have to focus on creating an environment that ensures not only that the requirements are adhered to, but that the correct requirements regarding accessibility are actually set. And now moving on to the good and bad practice examples. the aim of this exercise has been to identify and map 6 constructions and assess their accessibility. So 3 constructions should serve as examples of good practice and 3 as examples of bad practice. And unfortunately, what has been shown, and our colleagues from the other participating countries have agreed, is that we have found no construction, no building where everything would be correct. So the examples of good and bad practice have not really been broken down into these categories, but we have pointed out good and bad elements. So we have, for instance, pointed out some shortcomings that are often encountered. The good and bad practice examples are then related to another output. And then the issue arose of how to do the mapping. So surely you would agree with me that you would perhaps have a different approach if you were to assess a new building, new construction. So you would assess it in line with the currently valid legislation, whether it's in line or not. And then naturally there would be a different approach to a historically valuable building built before a certain legislation came into force and effect. And naturally, if you would apply parameters from the currently valid legislation, you would see that it's inaccessible. Yes, thank you. The assessment of the building is naturally then determined by the experience of majority of users. So we have come up with a single methodology for mapping. However, it's a methodology only for persons with a severe mobility impairment. In the good and bad practice examples, I actually played around with various types of mapping. I wanted to point out the results that can be achieved depending on what mapping you select. So we can, for instance, take one example of a new city hall building in Prague. So this building is labeled as wheelchair accessible on the accessibility map of Prague. However, this building is not accessible. You can see it here that it is very steep. There are steep ramps, very strange. Then there is this staircase. It's not marked properly. So there are issues faced by various groups of people. There are further issues that, for instance, can be found on new gallery, newly opened in Prague. So this building is again on the accessibility map of Prague, marked as accessible for wheelchair users. And here in black, well, this is what is actually from the accessibility map, but in blue, this is for persons with a visual and hearing impairment, and what's in red, so this is a very severe risk to safety that actually applies not only to a person with disability, but to everyone. So this is, you know, the ramp. The ramp is not marked in any way, so you can see that the clearance then is low, so it is a risk, for instance, head injury, etc., as you can see from the photo. So this is what we've identified, and everything is well described in the document. What are the benefits of the project? So let me mention that it was really great that there is this form available and leaflets that our Hungarian colleagues have come up with. Then there is the possibility of benchmarking the methodologies, and you know, there could be professional mapping according to the methodology in the Czech Republic, and also possibility of lathe mapping. I must say that yesterday I took part in one negotiation dedicated to accessibility, tourism, and cultural monuments. It was mentioned there that actually they also got a form there slightly different from the one that they came up with Hungary, and the people there at the event said that they were to fill it in, but as they you know, didn't know sometimes what to fill in, the outcome of this mapping exercise is perhaps not very professional. So what we strive for in the Czech Republic is that mapping is professional, that the outputs are comparable and certified in a way, so that there is some weight to that. Communication with the expert public is also very important, and also communication with public administration.
Já jako velikým přínosem toho projektu.
What is a great benefit of the project is the situation analysis, and also the examples of good and bad practice. I actually have used these documents in my communication with the Ministry of Regional Development, which is in charge of construction legislation. I have used those documents as arguments for our new construction legislation, so that its focus is on creating a barrier-free environment, a truly barrier-free. And from the outputs of the project, indeed, I have gathered many arguments for the establishment of a working group at the level of the Ministry for Regional Development that would strive to address the issues that I've outlined, so that we can see constant progress forward, so that we would be not building new barriers, but building a truly accessible environment. An accessible environment that would be safe and easy to use for everyone, including persons with disabilities. So much from my side. Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation, Dagmar. It was packed with useful information for us as well. And now it's the time for our Slovak colleagues to start their presentations. The order is that first Natalia Filova will tell us a few words about the Slovak context. Natalia works at the Technical University of Bratislava. Then she will be followed by activists from Košice, Aktivisti z klubu. Hey guys. And the Slovak block will be completed by Maria in the end from SOCIA Foundation. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabor. Pokúsim sa zdieľať obrazovku.
I will try to share my screen. I hope you can see the whole screen, my presentation.
Can you
and also
see the
changes.
screen? Okay. So I will
try to share.
I will share my PDF
I
format,
hope
which probably will be easier.
Will work well.
And without any difficulties. Can you see
the full screen? Okay. Also the change is good.
Also the
Thank you very much.
Yes, everything is okay.
Thank
you
you
very much for this confirmation.
Very good morning to
Once
all
again,
of you. I am Natalia Filova from the Faculty of Architecture and Design of the Slovak Technical University and Center of Barrier-Free Design or Universal Design.
Accessible design.
As long-standing partners, we have been invited to be partner to this very interesting project, and we'd like to thank
najmä z pohľadu legislatívy a potom aj
legislative perspective, and then a couple of examples of what we were mapping. Currently, the legislative situation in Slovakia is somewhere in the middle ground. Old legislation is about to be kind of terminated and
please.
lost.
There are problem with the interpretation. Please, all interpreter, check the channels.
I hope you can hear me on the English channel. This is Tatiana speaking on the
Yes,
no.
Right.
Can you? No. It's okay. You can speak in Slovak.
Should I speak English?
I think if you can carry on in English, that helps us, yes, for the time being.
And the interpreter will speak in Slovak.
Yes, they will do it.
The problem was we heard two English interpretation in one channel.
It was only Tatiana speaking into English channel. Okay, so in Should I
speak in Slovak or English, please?
Can you repeat, please, Natalia?
If you're
should I speak in English or Slovak, please?
Natalia, if you feel comfortable speaking in English, by all means, speak English.
Okay, surely I speak better Slovak, but however, I can switch to English. So the first law that is currently applied in Slovakia is
zákon, který
from 1976, which mentions accessible and barrier-free use of buildings and designing them. So all of the buildings for public use must be accessible for all. It is very important to notice that it applies not only to new buildings, but also to renovations. So every time that a building procedure is started, this law applies, and the building must be made accessible, which is not always noticed, or not everybody is aware of that. The second important document or a decree in Slovakia is Decree 532, which mentions that technical requirements for buildings used by persons with reduced mobility and orientation should be applied in those buildings. But the question arises, which buildings are they? Which buildings are concerned in this? So the answer is, it is all buildings to which the public has access. So not only specialized institutions or protected workshops, but all buildings for public, so that everyone has access to them, which can be also misinterpreted sometimes. Next document is a technical standard for residential buildings, which was updated 2 years ago, and it mentions accessible use and accessible apartment. Many sections or information about that were added those 2 years ago, and it also of course applies to all common spaces in apartment buildings. So not every apartment must be accessible, but some percentage of them, and all common areas. So in the future, it is expected that 2 laws will come into force instead of the old Building Act from 1976. So those 2 laws are Act on Special Planning and Building Act. So Act on Spatial Planning concerns urban design. So it is very interesting and important that accessibility and barrier-free design is applied not only in architectural design, but also in urban planning. So it concerns mainly areas with higher terrain, hills. So the urban planner must take into account this situation and design routes and streets in such a way that they are not too steep. So instead of a straight and steep route, there will be a serpentine and so on. And also public amenity buildings should be connected in an accessible way. Also, the second future law, Building Act, is very huge and concerns many issues, and barrier-free use or accessibility is mentioned here in several paragraphs. So in this in the future. So we can also mention other important documents, standards, and it is important to mention that we cooperate with the new Office of Planning and Construction at the level of this project, Design for All, and also at the level of our Faculty of Architecture and Design. So 3 standards are being prepared: accessible changing rooms and hygiene, accessible public spaces, and accessible buildings. So this should also improve the situation in the future. We, of course, want to raise awareness about among professionals and also the public. So this project, Design for All, and also our national project, this aim of systematic changes and improvements in this area, and legislative change as well. Several publications have been written, so you can check them out later. in this presentation, there's hyperlinks as well. So now I'd like to shortly show some of our findings within this project. So we tried to evaluate 10 buildings mostly, and we concentrated ourselves on those funded by the European Union because it is very crucial that those buildings apply all the criteria of universal design and are made accessible. So we can see the first example of Kulturpark Košice, which is a cultural area with several historic buildings which were renovated, and also some new structures and public space. In those photographs, we can see a square with tactile guidelines, which are also of contrasting color. So it is a very very positive example as leading lines for people with visual impairment. We can see that those guiding lines lead towards a ramp which makes accessible the main entrance of a building. So it is a very good solution in terms of universal design, because the main entrance is made accessible. We can also notice that it has handrails or hand holdings in several heights. So this is a good example. Of course, in every case study, as mentioned previous presenter, there are some reserves which we found, for example, in the toilet of this building, because it for example, doesn't allow space for tucking in for a person in a wheelchair, and also the mirror is too high, and we should also add a panic button here. So this is not entirely perfect. The second example is a museum for protecting nature and caves, and it is also a historic building which was made accessible using a ramp, which we can see here, also a sheltered ramp with handrails. So it is very good. It's leading from the main entrance to the exterior area, so it is universal and for all. We can also notice ramps in historical interior exhibitions, so that's also positive, and accessible toilet. Of course, with also some reserves in terms of, for example, the mirror should also be positioned lower so that a person in a wheelchair can see themselves in it. Some negative issues in these buildings may be noticed here also. The first one are stairs without razors, which can cause the risk of tripping. So it's not perfect. And in this building, it is very good that an elevator has been added. However, the controls are positioned in quite big height and in a recessed area, so it is difficult. It can be difficult for a person to reach them from a wheelchair. And some glass areas are quite reflective and lack a hardened part in the bottom, which can be also risky. The last example is a library of a Catholic university, and it has spacious shelves and also at a lower height, which is a very good example. And also we can notice contrasting colors, so they are very well noticeable. And also there is quite a good example of information desk and all overall informational accessibility, because the person can reach the computer and information panel from the wheelchair, and also for people with visual impairment we can see the information also in Braille letters and colorful contrasting in color. Which is some drawbacks in this realization are mainly stairs and landings. We can notice that stairs miss risers, so again risk of tripping, and these landings in some areas have a glass floor, which can cause which can scare people, or it can be slippery, or dogs for assisting people with visual impairment can have problem with it as well. So this is not a great example in terms of universal design, and also these railings miss handholds, so people cannot be supported that well. So we evaluated several of these buildings, which you can see in those publications, and we used control or evaluation sheets, also from our faculty, but mostly from this project, a tool for monitoring accessibility, a MEOSZ evaluation sheet. And here in these two photographs, you can see our trainings with activists, first in Košice and second in Bratislava, with participants who helped us use those monitoring tools and evaluated those two buildings, which took place for these activities.
You have 1 minute, Natalia. Okay.
Thank you for your attention.
Excellent, excellent timing. Thank you, Natalia.
You're very welcome. I will stop sharing.
The next is our friends from Košice, who I understand have had some problems with the city council's plans for new buildings, and we would be glad to hear about your experiences. For this presentation that we run in Slovak language, we will try to avoid the mistake we made earlier, so we hope that the Hungarian interpreter will only hear one English translation at one time. Thank you. You can start.
No. Thank you very much. Let's try sharing our screen. I hope you can see our screen. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to take you for a little guided tour through our room. You see our colleagues, our clients, and part of our mapping team, so to say. So this is us. And to start with, I'd like to introduce us. We are from a children's club of youth and children with disabilities. We are a social service center of community type and a day type center. And we basically operate in Košice, and we would like to show you what we have experienced in the past couple of months, also thanks to the fact that we have participated in this exercise and in this evaluation and testing. At the beginning of this project, of our involvement in this project, we participated in a seminar that took place in our center and was organized by SOCIA Foundation and the Research Center for Universal Design, represented by the previous speaker, Natalie. Our goal was to actively participate in the project and actually get access to methodology of mapping of universal design and accessibility. This is our team participating in the seminar in our premises. We have got information on human rights, construction acts, construction laws, and examples of good and bad practice. And the seminar allowed us to actually test the evaluation forms, basically in our very organizations. And if there were any unclarities, we could have consulted them with participating experts. On the left-hand side, you see the reception in our organization, then the lift in the center, and to the right, Martina was mapping the accessible toilet. What was of great help to us in this mapping exercise was this support letter of SOCIA, because we are rather a community organization and not a national organization. And thanks to this endorsement letter, we got a better negotiating position when approaching public institutions. So this letter really helped us to make our mapping exercise kind of an international exercise, and really it made our position stronger. This is a business academy, and a couple of days after the seminar, the director of this school approached us without knowing about the seminar, what should be the priorities of his school in making it really accessible to all. So we decided to use our evaluation forms, and to the right-hand side, you can see us with on the left-hand side, we are with the director. And this school is really not accessible, and you see their current solution. It's not ideal, but the director really wants the school to become accessible. And a couple of people using wheelchair actually studied at this school already. The director participated in person in our mapping exercise. He really was and is aware of the fact that how that the devil is in the details, like handrails, where there are positions, where are the like management panels installed, etc. So he was really personally very involved. Later on, we decided to visit the city office or the municipal office of our city district. And we not only wanted to test the physical barriers, but also the mindset of the clerks or the civil servants. We decided to really come unannounced, like pay a random and unannounced visit. There was a ramp leading to the office, the ramp was built by the current mayor of the city borough. The previous mayor was saying that it had been impossible. When we came to the municipal office, the servants were rather happy that we paid the visit, and they called the mayor as well. So we could personally hand over the endorsement letter of SOCIA and our request to test their office through our methodology. You see the mayor in the center in the white shirt, and our team. That was a kind of an unexpected visit to the office, as I've already said. The mayor really made a positive impression. He also talked to us on individual level and also invited us to map the environment of our center as well. We are currently working on it, and the city district informed about this activity on its social network. After about a month, we came back to this office with the evaluation form. It took us about 1.5 hours to fill out the form. We really had prepared for it. We had crossed out things not applicable to the municipal office, such as locker rooms, and that was our first testing exercise. I need to say we did pretty good. There were 7 of us, and the mayor did not participate in the mapping, but the employees asked for the results. So the mayor only saw the testing of the forms, but not the real testing of the building. We wanted to walk the same path when testing the city hall, but you can see that the entrance to the city hall, and you need to call for assistance. We'll get back to the main entrance later on. We only see the side entrance and the device or the ramp. There were 3 people on wheelchairs who were part of our testing group. But the worker was rather unhappy. She was saying like she doesn't have time for helping us. There were too many of us, and then she asked us to use the underground garage on our way out. And you can see 3 of our colleagues who were really trying to ring the bell. The bell is very badly positioned, and only one of them managed to really ring the bell. When we finally and eventually got into the building, we stopped by at the information desk, and we wanted to ask how we could hand over a letter to the mayor. We led Matúš to communicate, but it's rather challenging to understand him due to his disability, and he barely finished what he wanted to say, and the lady at the information desk objected that we should have picked somebody else who is more understandable than Matúš, that why we had picked him. And we tried to understand, we tried to explain ourselves that, yes, we are trying to communicate with public offices. And at the end, she kind of backed off, and she said she understood the importance of the exercise. Then she sent us to the registry office, and then at the end of the day we didn't need to leave through the garage, but we were sort of assisted by the employee of the city hall. She definitely changed her mind. Probably after the agreement with another colleague, they wanted to mitigate the damage and the bad impression the city hall had left. A couple of weeks after, we had tried to amicably deal with the city hall. We actually learned that the city hall wanted to reconstruct the stairway, unfortunately, without thinking about universal design and accessible design. So to the left, you see the reconstruction works, and on the right-hand side, you see the result. However, there is no ramp, no nothing, no accessibility. We wrote a letter to the main architect of the city of Bratislava, and we also supported with arguments of calling to legislation they are breaching, actually, and we are trying to look for ways how to cooperate with the city of Košice, becoming members of some working groups or teams. So that's in the pipeline, and we will see what is going to happen. Benefits of testing. We got information about accessibility parameters. We became active. Civic activation was one of the benefits. The whole of the mapping team became really active and involved and engaged. The evaluation sheets are a great tool that opens the door and opens also the topic of accessibility at the public institutions. We have made the accessibility a topic, a relevant topic for public institutions. And we also strengthened, it was an empowerment exercise, because some of our team members have never been or had never been to any public institution before. So it was an empowerment for them. We will continue with communicating with the City Hall. We want to continue to raise awareness about this topic and the civil and human rights of all the citizens with disabilities. And we will also practice the communication at public institutions. And to conclude, I want to thank our colleagues from SOCIA Foundation, Czech colleagues and Hungarian colleagues for the opportunity of being part of this project and for having this opportunity to test things in practice. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much for your presentation and the example. I was really thrilled to see your activism in Košice. This was exactly the reason why we started the whole project. That these initiatives happen, that we go to the power, we go to holders of the power, city councils and governments, and tell this strong message that you just conveyed to them. Anyway, now we have a short, brief presentation by Maria, who was kind enough to offer me just congested, sort of really compound presentation instead of 10 minutes. Maria, you have 5 minutes left, because then we need to take a short break before we turn on the final part of our day.
Thank you, Gabor, for the floor, and I will continue in Slovak for interpreters to know. Rovnako ako Gabor, a ja si myslím, že...
Just like Gabor, I do think that it's much more important for you to listen to what was happening in Košice and maybe somewhere else in Slovakia, but one way or another, I really want to bring your attention in the upcoming minutes to the situation we are facing. And I want to talk about Euro funds, because too many of public investments happening in this region are funded from by the European Union, and therefore the approach and the rules set by the Commission are very important. So what are the lessons learned? The public sector doesn't have enough information quite often how much inaccessible the buildings are. The City Hall of Košice thinks that they have done it all, that the entrance through garage is enough, and therefore they don't feel any need to improve the situation. Secondly, we realize that not even the experts are grantors of the really high quality universal design projects, and therefore we really lack educational and training programs for architects and for engineers, and the lack of such programs causes neglect of this very important topic, and also leads to the fact that the needs of people with disabilities are overlooked or ignored. And last but not least, Slovakia lacks really efficient control mechanism. Because if we cannot check something, then the results are really not satisfactory. So the lessons learned with the story of the EU funds, and I don't think this is applicable only to Slovakia, but to other countries. If the Commission sets certain rules and expectations when it gives out money, then it can really initiate various changes and lead many changes. For instance, when talking about Slovakia, it's a transformation of, it's the deinstitutionalization of care, and therefore universal design or accessible design could and should be strongly supported by the EU. On the other hand, the Commission then needs to require the compliance with rules, and we see that it cannot just rely on the member states to have a certain system that would check it. And I'm talking about this also in connection with a huge amount of investments that are paid with the EU money. Just an example, in the last programming period, the energy dependency of public buildings or buildings as such was to be decreased. This is police client center. Well, the windows were changed, the insulation was made, but it's not accessible. The same applies to this kindergarten. So the insulation was installed, the energy consumption was cut, but you see the accessibility. Very naive type of solution and bad solution. So on one hand, we say something, but on the other hand, we cannot require it and we cannot check it. We welcome in the new programming period that the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is the core and baseline horizontal condition. Well, what should it bring for us? We expect the Commission to prepare certain guidelines and require this to be an exclusion criteria. And also, we expect it to support the member states to involve the experts into project evaluation. Okay, what is going to happen in Slovakia is a kind of interregnum in legislations, no man's land, so to say. At the time when we are trying to launch new programming period, we are finishing with one system, evaluation system and system of issuing construction permits. On the other hand, the new law and the new decrees may be more specific, and some projects will start running as well. So on one hand, we do have experience where the supervising body, that is at the Ministry of Social Works and Family, has established kind of a transitory expert evaluation, and as of 2018, this interim expert evaluation looked into more than 350 large investment projects like highways, tunnels, and others, and also in the ITC, of the ITC projects. And it has spent less than 100,000 euro for in order to pay those experts. So it's not expensive, but we need to become more efficient because thousands of other projects are simply not evaluated by those experts on accessibility. So what is Slovakia trying to do in the new programming period is to introduce and implement the new evaluation mechanism, and expects that the horizontal principle of non-discrimination and universal design will be an exclusion criteria. This mechanism was approved by the government, but what we see in practice is that so far it hasn't been really used too much. So we see that there's room for improvement. We need to work more with the ministerial body. So our open hand and offer is to create a system of exclusion criteria for those decision makers that are inspired by the evaluation sheets that have been used in our project and at the Faculty of Architecture. And we have also offered to develop a special evaluation process and an annex to investment projects that should be a mandatory part of the investment projects that will clearly stipulate and specify how the accessibility is going to be resolved, and that would make the life of experts easier, and methodological guidance would definitely be needed for those who evaluate the projects and those who develop the projects. That's our offer. And currently we are discussing with our managing body, but primarily the managing body and the supervising body of those projects. So I want to leave you with one very important thing. Green Deal is discussed as a thing of our future, that is a key to our future, but we want our political representatives to realize that universal design or design for all is also for our future. Currently, it's applicable to 10 to 30% of people. It's a necessity. For 50% of people, it could really be a convenient aid, but for 100% of us, it's much more comfortable and nicer. This is our take-home message that we are trying to communicate to public administration in Slovakia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. That was very informative and helpful for us to put it into context. For those who are interested in the EU context of it, how the European Union funds play an important role in this, stay with us after the break, because we will have Daniel Casas from the European Disability Forum, who will tell us about all the legal aids available for those who are wishing to do something about EU funds misused in this context. So this is now time for a break. We will take 10 minutes. 10 minutes is badly needed for our interpreter as well. We will meet at 11:12, so in 10 minutes here, and then you can hear about MEOSZ and finally about the European Union context. Thank you. See you soon. Welcome back, everyone, after the break. I hope we all had the time for a coffee or a tea. And I would like to ask just one more minute, probably before starting the next presentation. I will ask Tamás Laki to start preparing his presentation he's going to share with us. I hope all the interpreters are present. The IT team is with us.
Yes, we are ready.
Thank you. And the next block and the final block This conference is about the experiences of MEOSZ, the Hungarian partner organization. This block will run only in English, so those not speaking English, please choose your interpretation channel below as before. And Tamás, Lucky, if you are with us, please switch on your camera and your presentation. Tamás is not there yet. Or if we don't have Tamás yet, can we start with you, Melinda, perhaps? If you're...
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. So
just give me a minute to share my screen.
Okay. So to introduce Melinda, while she's sharing her screen, Melinda is a human rights lawyer specialized in anti-discrimination law, and she's been with MEOSZ for a while. Yes, it's ready. Okay, go on, Melinda.
Okay. So unlike those who spoke so far, I'm going to talk about the legal actions we can take. And I really want to encourage you with this presentation to take legal actions. Here I gathered the main activities of an NGO. Like I'm sure we all do advocacy work, research, maybe training, awareness raising for sure. And the last one is litigation. It's different from the others because it can be done when the violation of the law has already occurred. So in this regard is different. And why shall we take legal actions? What is the present case now concerning accessibility? So if we see the legal framework, it's more or less okay. So we have all the domestic and international legislation. For sure, we have the CRPD, the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. I'm sure you all have your domestic laws like anti-discrimination laws, disability acts, and so on. In Hungary, for example, and I'm sure this is the case with you as well, if you had deadlines concerning accessibility, all the deadlines have expired by
Melinda, let me stop you for a
2023,
moment.
so it's not a problem anymore.
We not see your presentation well. You are standing on the last page.
Last page.
Maybe you have two screen shared.
I don't know. Okay, then I stopped sharing.
Yes, and please share the proper screen. If you have two screen, share screen 2. If you have one screen, then share screen 1.
Okay. Zoom is not my friend, I shall say. Okay. So shall I click on the...
In the active presentation, you can click on that, or you can choose the screen.
Okay, now what do you see?
Now we see our PowerPoint application. So if you want to move here, then click to the first one.
Okay, maybe I leave it like this. Do you
Yes,
see the title is "Do we have an effective legal and institutional framework?" Is
yes,
this the title?
We see that, so you will use it.
Okay, then I leave it like this. I don't go with the full screen charts. Okay, So, so accessibility is a present obligation. Buildings, I mean, at least in Hungary, buildings providing public services and buildings, public buildings shall be accessible now. And what is really important from the legal point of view, the lack of accessibility is direct discrimination. So we have all the laws, I mean, more or less in compliance with the international standards. What we don't really have, or there are some flaws having those kind of stuff, is institutions. We have our government bodies like authorities, courts, equality bodies, but what we don't have is an overall public accessibility strategy. We don't have adequate control mechanisms, and we don't have a dedicated public body responsible for accessibility. I mean, EU, you might be aware of, is moving towards an accessibility agency, which is a very good solution for that problem. We really want to have a body like this in Hungary, but I think a lot of steps shall be made towards that institution. And the major problem is that the state itself violates the law. So when a public building is not accessible, it's the responsibility of the state. So when it comes to legal actions, what can we do? We can take individual cases before the courts or before an equality body or the building authority. These cases are effective, but only in that specific case. So the problem with random cases is that you may win the case, but it doesn't have a wider effect. And the problem is that it's not possible to sue in every single case when there is an inaccessible building, and neither the NGOs nor the authorities have this capacity to try all the cases. I mean, even if the authority has an ex officio power, meaning it can initiate a case on their own decision, they won't have the capacity, they won't have the staff, the money, nothing. So it means that these cases has a little chance of achieving a systemic change. Systemic change, however, can be achieved by the so-called strategic litigation. And litigation, I mean in a broad sense, like not only before courts, but also before equality bodies, ombudsperson, building authorities. And strategic litigation have comprehensive impact, and it can achieve systemic and legislative changes. Like, for example, what Gabor mentioned, the case of Bendegúz Nagy against this Central Coffee back in 2002 it was a precedent case. It was a strategic litigation because it was one of the first cases in this field, and the outcome really fueled further advocacy, further achievements of accessibility. And strategic litigation can be used even if the legislative framework is appropriate, but the case law is inadequate. So, I mean, it's not the only way to use it when you don't have the sufficient standard of laws, of acts, of the legal framework. For example, you can use it when you have a case law that usually applies sanctions to a lower extent. For example, the fines are not high enough, and it is also a possibility to launch a case trying to reach higher fines, and with this trying to force authorities or legal actors to take action and to put an end to legal violations. There is a specific case I want to talk about. We were very lucky because during this project, the ombudsperson launched an inquiry on the accessibility of the built environment. We had a lot of output by the time from the project. For example, we had the situation analysis by that time, and we also had the good and bad practices kind of work that one of our supporting engineers did. So this comprehensive inquiry is very effective because it's capable of identifying systemic flaws. The problem with it, on the other hand, that the ombudsperson cannot impose sanctions. So the decision is not binding in this sense. However, it can call the legislators and the government bodies to take actions by making recommendations. So this procedure was a perfect possibility for us to provide an overview, a comprehensive analysis of the legal and practical issues regarding the built environment. And we really grabbed this opportunity and gave a thorough analysis of the current situation of the accessibility of the built environment. And for sure, the recommendations that it's not out there yet, so we don't know the outcome of this case. But once the recommendations will be out, we will be able to use it in our strategic litigation work and also in our advocacy work. So what did we do in this procedure? We identified a lot of areas where conceptual changes shall be made. I just want to go very quickly through this. I don't want to waste your time because I know we are a bit, never mind. So the legislative framework is more or less okay. We examined that. We also examined the investment and construction procedure. We examined this particular issue, the accessibility of public spaces and open spaces. We examined the conflicts between accessibility and the protection of the built environmental heritage, which is a huge issue here in Hungary, since we have a lot of building that is considered to be so-called environmental heritage. We analyzed the tendering and public procurement procedure, and also the rights and obligations of the professionals who are involved in the tender process. We examined the shortcomings of the training of engineers, and we examined thoroughly two specific areas, the accessibility of housing and the accessibility of workplaces. What we found? We found that these separate factors are adding up to a serious violation of rights, the right to equal access. Because, I mean, we know the present case, a lot of buildings, public buildings and buildings providing public services are not accessible. So we found that there is a lack of compliance with international and national legislation to an extent that is crucial. Even though the big picture is fine, there are some points where the legislation is still not in compliance with the international standards. We also found that we don't have a comprehensive accessibility strategy. The training of professionals is not adequate. The control mechanisms in the construction process is practically lacking. The official procedures are inadequate. There is inconsistencies in tendering requirements, and the EU-funded tenders are not controlled well, or if I might say, not controlled at all. Having seen all this, we have the question, are legal proceedings useful? And I think they are, but not alone. They are interconnected with other NGO activities. So legal procedures and other NGO activities like advocacy, like lobbying, they complement each other and amplify each other's effects. So that's why I think taking legal action is one of the most important activity of an NGO. So if a legal action is successful, it can point out the systemic shortcomings, and these findings can be really well used in awareness raising and advocacy. And it works also the other way around. So if there is awareness in a certain legal case, the judge will be affected by this public awareness, and it really will influence his or her decision. So I really encourage you to take legal actions. I mean, to look around in your community, use the toolkit that was already mentioned and used by you. And if you see something that it's not accessible, go to the courts, go to the equality bodies, and initiate a lawsuit, either a strategic one or just a random case. It's gonna help. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for this presentation. Also the final words. I think many of us agree with you on that last point, that when you see something is not right, do use the rights you are given. If you don't launch a complaint procedures, it's very likely that no one will. It is not easy always, but we must use what we have. I will ask Tamás Lucky to start his presentation. Tamás, you will only have 10 minutes now because we are running behind schedule, so only 10 minutes. But I will remind you 2 minutes before your time is out.
Yes. Do you see the screen sharing?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I have almost missed my presentation. Excuse me for that, but I'm finally here and try to keep it in 10 minutes. I'm supposed to talk about the accessibility toolkit we created, which is a whole technical thing. But what I'm talking about is communication. I work for MEOSZ and for Innotech, which is a unit in the MEOSZ dealing with technical questions, all engineering related issues, typically building accessibility and all things related to that. I myself am an architect and a rehabilitation engineer and having a private business, so I have met lots of hundreds of buildings and the construction problems on site and on designing tables. And here I try to save some minutes and sharing a slide showing that accessibility, there is a moment, I have lost my control. So it's not a question of love, as Depeche Mode was singing about. Accessibility, as many times, is kept as a question of charity, but it's what we work on in MEOSZ, that to send the message that accessibility is an obligatory thing, and it's your responsibility. So all the persons who are involved in this whole process, they have a responsibility, and they have to fulfill that, and they have to do their work in the best way they can. So if we look on building construction, I mean, we are talking about buildings and accessibility of buildings. It's a whole process, starting from the idea through the planning, and it goes through authorities, and there is a construction phase when the building is actually built, and it's a control period. I try to focus on what the role of disability organizations are, because if my opinion is, and my understanding is, when a building is not accessible, that means there is a lack of communication somewhere. There is a lack of understanding of the main message that the building should be accessible. So somewhere in the process, this message is lost. And what a disability organization can do is highlight the problem, show the problem, express it. And what I talk about is how to express it in a way that it goes to the right place and it gives solutions and not only complaints. So all of us know examples. We have seen several ones with toilets which can't be used. And the stair lifts which can be accessed and which are locked, or ramps which may be risky to use, which can be also dangerous or too poor in quality. And our favorite is a special, very design construction, is the stramp, which is a combination of stairs and ramps, but it's very dangerous as a stair and very dangerous as a ramp also. But we see good examples as well, ramps with normal handrails and offices with full equipped accessibility parameters, which are really accessible for all kinds of disability, the people with all kinds of disability. And now I turn to the toolkit, and I try to start why I am talking about communication. And I messaged to Gabor that I have 4 minutes from the 15. So if a person, for example, sitting in a wheelchair or who is blind, goes to a building and if experiences that he or she can't access the building or can't use the building, it's surely not accessible. It's not a question. But there's other thumb rules that we should keep in mind, as I'm talking about not non-professionals who are supposed to use this toolkit. So the ones who are not architects and not designers or not no access experts, if they experience that service is accessible for them, it doesn't mean that it's accessible for others as well. So it has to be very clear that the evaluation should be objective, and that's where the toolkit comes and helps. If you think of a process a building is used, it's a long process. Why you will go to a building is to access, to get to a service, and this can be anything, but the route until you get the service can be very long and has several steps. And the toolkit helps to analyze this process and break it down to simple steps which can be easily evaluated. So this was the time to get to in the library to get the book, and this animation illustrated the problems that appeared. And if the person can get the book, then this building is accessible. If not, it's not accessible. There are not partly accessible buildings, because if you can't access the service, it's not accessible. And our toolkit has a vision to be electronic, to have an electronic version which can be run on laptops or notebooks. And when you go through a building, it will help you with very simple questions. And you see on the left-hand side, it's yes/no questions, and on the right-hand side, you see an illustration which shows what to look at. It helps to understand what's the question about. And if it's not enough, you can ask for special information, detailed information, which helps
time is running
you
out.
to answer the
1
question.
minute, Tamás.
So that's our vision to get to this point. By up to this moment, we have a print version of this, and this toolkit, this accessible survey toolkit, consists of 8 modules. These 8 modules go through the process of using a building. It's a route to the building, entrance, circulation, vertical circulation, information system, and so on. And each module has a survey form, and on the left-hand side you see the modules, and on the right-hand side you see one specific module, a survey form for that module, and it has questions. So it guides you through step by step, or guides you through the building, and you see red boxes. And when the answer gets into the red box, that means that it directly violate some legislation. So it will help the evaluation. And of course, here are the red dots. And the ones, and in a print form, there's a separate guidance, a guide document, which has the same numbering and guides you through the answers and gives you information how to answer the questions with illustrations and photos. So that's how it's built up, and all you need is I was citing Depeche Mode, and I saying a bit list as all you need is love, but for this service you need these tools are shown on the picture. And my two last thought is an evaluation and this database. I'm talking about the evaluation.
1 minute,
the
please
evaluation
wrap up,
goes
Tamás.
in a way
Please
that if all requirements are fulfilled, you shall say the building is accessible, it's all right. If in all other cases, you should give evaluation that is not accessible, even if only small reconstruction is needed, or reorganizing the furniture would be enough. But if it's not done, it's not accessible. And finally, I talk about how we are planning to use this tool when we get to the electronic version, which is connected to a database, which is built up a database. There are lots of buildings around who we hope are going to be surveyed, and the information of this service go directly to an online database where we have these buildings, list of buildings. And if we sorted them out, having good and bad practices, what we can easily do in a database, we are close to use it as a communication tool, because if we put them on paper form, the good examples can be used for PR purposes, and the bad examples, bad practices could be based for complaints. And
Köszönjük, Tamás. Thank you.
Importance of this toolkit is that if you don't, if you say that this building is not accessible for me, then this is a personal problem. An answer from an authority or an architect will be, I feel sorry for you, but it's not my problem. But if you give, if you say that there is an engineering failure in this building, then immediately the professionals involved in the process understand their language, because if there's an engineering failure, that is their responsibility and their competence to correct it. So that's what I think this toolkit is useful, because you can name, you can find, it helps you to find the engineering problems, the design failures, and it helps you name it in a way that can be understood. And
thank you, Tamás.
And you can articulate it to the authorities and decision makers in a way as they will understand it. And it's a good material or a good form which helps you to make a complaint, and it, in a way, it will be understood and some corrections can be made. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you can use it in your project.
Thank you, Tamás. Please stop sharing your screen, and the floor goes immediately to Daniel Casas from the European Disability Forum. Unfortunately, we are running behind time, Daniel, so if you could please present in roughly 7 or 8 minutes, that would allow for at least 2 questions in the end. And would you please start with very briefly introducing EDF to the audience? I'm not sure everyone knows your organization. Thank you.
Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Do I share the PowerPoint, or you do?
Yes, you do it from your own computer.
Okay, please. Okay, just give me 1 sec then. Okay, you see the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. Okay, well, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting EDF to this interesting conference on European funds and accessibility. As a brief introduction, who we are an umbrella organization based in Brussels that represents persons with disabilities. And one of our goals is to work for the full implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And to do so, we work closely with the European Union, the Council of Europe, and also the United Nations. Well, as I'm the last one to present, I'll try not to be so boring and to go straight into the point. So what I'll try to do is to give some perspective on why the European level decisions and laws and policies are important, also at the national level, and explain a bit what are the obligations and the tools that we also have at our disposal that can be important when we work at the national level. Just as an introduction, I would like to say that with the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, there's a legal obligation, not only for member states, but also for the European Union to promote accessibility and universal design. The European Union has the capacity to do so because it has competencies in many relevant areas, and it also has budgetary powers. As I said, these powers coexist with those of the member states, which at the end of the day have the main responsibility in the area of accessibility. But we have to take into account that member states are responsible when European laws are being negotiated, because they negotiate them themselves, because they implement them, and also when it comes to European funds, as I'm sure you have mentioned in today's conference, member states are responsible also for implementing them and spending them, such as cohesion funds. So what are the tools that the European Union has developed based on on that legal obligation and those competencies? Well, the first thing that the European Union has done is to adopt and develop laws that are relevant in accessibility. We have some which are quite important when it comes to ICT, the Web Accessibility Directive, which deals with websites and applications, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which deals especially with TV broadcast and on-demand platforms such as Netflix, the Electronic Communications Code that deals with telephony services, with internet access, and also emergency communications. And we have relevant laws in the field of transport. The one that I said here is the TSI PRM, which is not really known. It's quite technical, but it deals with accessibility of train vehicles and infrastructure, and also passenger rights legislative framework. But a key milestone when it comes to accessibility at the European level has been the adoption of the European Accessibility Act, which was a demand that we had from the disability movement. What this directive does is to create obligation for public authorities and also economic operators, that is companies, to develop and to procure accessible products and services, especially in the ICT field. Although the scope of this directive is quite limited, there's some interesting things that we need to take into account. The first one is that it directly relates to public procurement. As I will explain later, there's an obligation to procure accessible products and services, but at the European level, this was not well defined. And the Accessibility Act provides this definition for the first time. And also I want to say that the criteria and accessibility requirements described in the legislation can also be applied to other laws. It provides some kind of framework on what accessibility is, and whenever a new piece of legislation is developed in a new field, these criteria can be applied. For example, we are doing it with artificial intelligence. We try to do it. We'll see if that will be the case once the law is adopted. As I said, apart from laws, we have budget, and budget is important because accessibility requires investment. The cohesion and regional funds, we know them. Also, the European Union can finance projects that are interesting for us. The Accessibility EU Center, which has been mentioned, is an example on how the EU can finance projects that are relevant in this field. Two things, apart from the sectorial accessibility legislation, we have to talk about the Common Provisions Regulation. This regulation explains how certain European funds must be spent. That includes cohesion funds, and it has some provisions when it comes to accessibility, and that creates legal obligations. As I said, member states are obliged to use to advance in accessibility when using European funds. And also there's the directive on public procurement, which I mentioned, which establishes how the public procurement must be done at the European level, and also takes into account accessibility in the design of the tenders and also in the definition of the specifications. Another issue that it's important to bear in mind, you all know them, are the European standards. They are voluntary, but they are I would say, the third layer. We have the international obligations, the laws, and then we have the standards, which provide more guidance and criteria on how to achieve that accessibility obligations. We currently have 3 standards for ICT products and services, also for design for all and built environment, and with the European Accessibility Act, new standards will be developed. The Accessible EU Center at the EU level, it's also relevant. It's a flagship initiative by the European Disability Strategy, and it is also the result of a proposal from EDF. We wanted to create a European agency working on accessibility. This was not the case finally, so we got a project with a limited duration of time, but maybe it's a starting point towards this future agency. The way this center will work is to kind of offer a service to the Commission that will enable the implementation of accessibility legislation. It will connect stakeholders, provide knowledge. It won't have regulatory powers so far, but it can be a good solution also to some of the issues that have been mentioned throughout the conference today. I'm about to finish. So taking into account all that I explained in my presentation, what we see is that here I think is that accessibility, it's a transversal issue, not a sectorial one, and sometimes it's difficult to make policymakers understand that. And whenever a new piece of legislation policy is being developed, we need to take into account always the accessibility perspective. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it is ICT, tourism, education, this component always needs to be there. Another challenge is that we have legislation, but sometimes the scope of application is quite limited. We have some examples with the Accessibility Act. It doesn't apply to all products and services, and also with passenger rights. Some transport modes are not covered. The European legislation is differently applied in member states. That's a challenge that we face. And this is the case because some pieces of legislation are directives, and that means that member states have some freedom on how they apply them at the national level. Other challenges is the difficulty to enforce legislation.
2 minutes, Daniel, 2 minutes.
Okay, and I'm gonna finish on time. And then also the difficulty to implement European funds. And I think that was also one of the key topics today. So what are the conclusions that I can say at the European level? The first thing is that we have the legal obligations, we have international obligations, European obligations, and national obligations. We also have the tools to ensure those obligations. As I said, the Accessibility Act provides some criteria on how to achieve accessibility, but also we have standards. So sometimes the main problem is not the lack of these obligations, but the lack of political will and also awareness on what accessibility is and how to achieve it properly. As it was mentioned in the last presentation, accessibility is not a matter of goodwill or solidarity. We have to understand that it's a right, that it's an obligation, but also we have to help explain that accessibility is also an investment that can have benefits for everyone. So everyone, not only persons with disability and reduced mobility, can benefit from from doors that open automatically or automatic subtitling. Everyone benefits. So I think this is an argument that we must always put forward. And I think that's the end of my presentation. I hope it was not too boring and clear, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being so precise with time, Daniel. That's a quite unique talent that I don't have. Sorry, I just switched off the switchboard. So now we have some time for questions to any of the speakers. Does anyone have any questions? We have touched on many different topics. You can ask questions about matters to architects, engineers. You can ask questions about law or advocacy. Actually, you can ask any kind of questions you want to be answered. Okay, until someone prepares a question. Okay, Ilaria.
Hello, so I'm a PhD student in Italy studying accessibility and disability studies in the disability studies field. And I have this question. I understand that the laws you talked about are about how to make new buildings or renovating buildings. I was wondering if you are aware of any law that asks existing buildings to do something like by a deadline to improve their accessibility, because this is something that also in Italy there is not in general. And now what I am studying is a particular local municipal regulation that actually asks this. So asks all the places open to the public to provide, for example, a ramp. So minimal adaptations, but they are mandatory and they have to do that by a deadline, even if they are not renovating. So are you aware of other examples like that?
Thank you for the question. I know the answer for Hungary, but maybe we should collect another question and then ask speakers to answer the questions. Does anyone else have a question?
Ak môžem, ja.
Okay.
Ľubomíra Gavláková, ANEPS,
If I may, I'm from the Association of People with Hearing Impairment of Slovakia. We are involved in a project about a system of induction loops. So it's for people with hearing impairment, people with severe hearing impairment, and people without hearing. And we would like to also know whether this is also part of the legislation, because we started a small survey in Slovakia over the phone and over the email. Public institutions have absolutely no awareness at all, or there are no information leaflets, nothing. And I have a feeling as if they wanted us to do, sales representatives of companies who have this specific equipment. There are other companies who care for installations. So there's one company that sells the equipment and the other that installs, and they want us, the association, to do their job, basically. And in Slovakia, basically, there's no information whatsoever, no awareness whatsoever. And even in elementary schools, secondary schools, with children, pupils with hearing impairment, they have no awareness of this at all. But I was quite surprised negatively by that. So induction system with induction system in relation to constructions, buildings. That's my question, whether there's anything like that in Hungary.
In Hungary, you ask specifically about Hungary.
Nie, Maďarsko a vlastne České.
Well, Hungary and maybe Czech Republic, whether you have
okay, thank you.
Whether you have experience with that.
I think I should give the opportunity to answer the first question about the deadlines. Melinda, would you like to give a brief answer about the Hungarian example? And Maria, if you can give an answer about the deadline with regards to Slovakia. Thank you.
So in Hungary, we used to have deadlines. The last deadline was 2013, as far as the accessibility of public buildings and buildings providing public services are concerned. So it means that from 2013, there is a present obligation for all these buildings to be accessible. Fully accessible, I mean. So I partly would like to answer our Slovak colleagues' question, if I understood that correctly, that full accessibility includes accessibility for the hearing, for people with hearing impairments. So at least in Hungary, these devices, I'm sorry, I don't know the name in English of this.
Induction loops.
Inductional loop, yeah. Inductional loop shall be installed as well, yes. Now, so if you detect a building that is not fully accessible and it's a public building or it provides a public service, then it's a violation of the laws in effect, at least in Hungary.
Thank you. Maria?
Just to react on the first question, I don't think that we do have an obligation for old building to be accessible. Always when you open the building permit procedure, then you have to fulfill the obligation. On one side, when you look at the law of the Public Building Act, on the other side, there are some expectations and from the European Standards or Accessibility Act, where they should somehow provide services that are accessible. And I think that there is a few years that have all the service providers according to the Accessibility Act. I don't know the exact date, but it's like 26 or 27 when they have to fulfill the conditions of the Accessibility Act.
Thank you, Maria. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If we don't, then I think this is time to thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you for attending this conference. As I said, we will do our best to upload this video recording of this event on YouTube. This will be on MEOSZ's YouTube, but we will be in touch with colleagues from SOCIA and NRZP to make sure that you are all aware of this link to this video. And we hope we have contributed somehow to changes that we would like to see, really. You know, even in small examples that are not so small, like the examples from Košice, so many people tend to think that those are just minor issues. Well, those are not minor issues until people can use those buildings and build environment freely. Even to big examples, like so-called big examples, like Daniel told us about the European level, where there are some attempts made to create a European Union level accessibility agency that would support and help governments and everyone in those changes. Anyway, thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, you saw my email that you received the Zoom link from. Please find me with questions in the future, and I wish you all a pleasant lunchtime. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Goodbye. Bye.